Hello everybody and welcome to Every Movie Ever. I'm your host Eric and this is of course the show where we are watching and reviewing every movie ever made. Starting today with Murder on the Orient Express. This is the most recent version of the picture, the one starring and directed by the great Kenneth Branagh. One of the, I would say, of this, current age, now that Olivier has passed, if I can get really pretentious for a second, maybe the finest Shakespearean filmmaker out there. Movies like his Hamlet really bring Shakespeare to life and are well done and performed in a way that I think makes Shakespeare easy to understand. And because of this, I have a great deal of esteem for Mr. Branagh. I also enjoy him as a performer. And in Murder on the Orient Express, where he is playing the somewhat meaty role of the eccentric detective Hercule Poirot, he is a good deal of fun. He's having a lot of fun as Poirot, and it's fun to see. That said, his direction is, I think, a little bit self-absorbed. That's sort of a problem with movies like this, where you're both the star and the director, especially when you're playing, a main character of a movie that's about you, right? Murder on the Orient Express is many things, but at its most basic, it is an Hercule Poirot mystery. And by directing a movie in which you are playing the star who is at the center of the events, it can be easy to fall into a trap wherein your directing feels self-absorbed, like you are giving yourself all of the best stuff to do. And unfortunately, Mr. Branagh, who does have, I think we can all agree, the ego for it, really falls into that trap of, the director loves his lead actor here. And unfortunately, they're one and the same person, which can be a little bit obnoxious. That said, this movie does have a super solid cast, which is part of what makes that self-absorbed directing so, unfortunate, is because there's so many other actors we would like to spend time with here. Actors like Dame Judi Dench. Daisy Ridley, who plays Rey in the new Star Wars trilogy, has a fairly substantial role here, and I wish we got to spend more time with her. Willem Dafoe is in this movie. Johnny Depp is in this movie, which, that he gets a little short shrift is all right. And so are another, dozen tremendous actors. Now, outside of what we already talked about, the other problem with this movie for me is that I think knowing the solution, knowing how the end of the mystery, the truth of the mystery, knowing that, I think hurts watching the movie, right? There is, the mystery, as you would expect, has a big twist at the end of it that I won't give away here. But if you have seen any other version of Murder on the Orient Express, any other one at all, then you know what that resolution is. It's fairly famous. And unfortunately, no matter how great the cast is, even if I think even if someone else maybe had directed it, or Branagh had a stronger producer or co-director, the fact remains, and this isn't necessarily a criticism of the movie itself, because I think if you don't know the solution, you're going to be more entertained. But for me, who does know the solution, that made it a little less fun to watch. And so all of that, adds up to me giving Murder on the Orient Express 3 stars. Let's talk about Under the Tuscan Sun, that late 90s, early 2000s landmark of, I don't think you can call this a romantic comedy or really a romantic movie, but I don't want to use, I'm only going to use this word because I think it is relevant here. I do not like this term, but sort of the prototypical late 90s, early 2000s chick flick. This one stars Diane Lane. I always love Diane Lane. And it was fun to see her in this after watching her more recently in the most recent season of House of Cards. Diane Lane is a woman who travels to Tuscany, gets a fixer-upper house, and this is going to sound stupid, I feel like, but here she falls in love with life. Her best friend is played by the also great Sandra Oh. It's a lot of fun watching these two ladies together in a movie. As for the movie itself, it is, it's fine. It kind of lacks depth. I would like a little bit more depth and detail to Diane Lane's journey. Still, it's nice to see a well-executed, female-fronted picture like this that is not really there's a version of this movie out there somewhere where she moves into this villa and then it's all about her trying to win the heart of one specific dude who's like, a Tuscan farmer or something like that. And this movie, and while there is romance here, this movie largely avoids that particular pitfall. And as such, it's what they might call a popcorn flick. It is a nice, fun movie to watch with some talented performers and enigmatic performers in it. Under the Tuscan Sun, 3 stars. It may shock you to know that as a young man, I was a weirdo. And one of the many ways in which I was a weirdo was that one of my favorite television shows in the 90s was Weird Science, the TV show based on the movie that was a first-run original show on the USA Network before that was even really a thing. It starred Vanessa Angel as Lisa, the cyberspace genie created by a couple of teenagers, and it followed their antics. I loved that show. And for whatever reason, I loved that show much more than I ever loved the movie Weird Science. The great John Hughes's feature film of that same story that the TV show was based off of. Recently, I decided it's about time I revisited Weird Science and gave it a chance, if only because you cannot swing a dead cat on the internet without seeing a meme of one of the evil brother character Chet having been turned into some sort of a mutant frog thing. Here's the thing about the movie of Weird Science. I don't like it that much. It's okay. But it is no John Hughes Great. It is no Breakfast Club. It's a movie that I think is pretty overrated. I think it's really choppy. I think the narrative lacks flow and never really has any sort of... the story structure of it is bad. It's a weird movie. It is very male-centric. As you might expect about a movie about 2 teenage boys who create a hot genie character that will do whatever they want her to do. That said, it's outside of Lisa the genie, it lacks strong female representation and becomes a very objectifying movie in a lot of ways. Ironically, though, Kelly LeBrock, who plays Lisa here, is great. She is great as this enigmatic. This is going to be weird to say, but almost Mary Poppinsian, a sort of 80s. Oh man, I really don't like saying this, but a sort of sexier 80s version of a Mary Poppins, if that makes sense. And she's great here. She always seems to be in on what's going on and seems to be able, in her performance, to rise above the often prurient material that she's been given. Still, the movie, man, it would benefit strongly from any kind of a plot or story structure. And it would benefit strongly from the boys learning a better lesson about, let's call it toxic masculinity. That said, it's still watchable. It just isn't as good as I think people would lead you to believe. Weird Science, 3 stars. And now it's time for Calling All Horror Hounds. Now, the horror hounds in the audience already know this, but for the rest of you folk out there, are you aware, are you cognizant of the fact that Joe Bob is back on our TVs? Yes, the great Joe Bob Briggs, the world's foremost and perhaps only drive-in movie critic, has returned. If you do not know Joe Bob, or if you're like, that sounds familiar, Eric, give me a little bit more information. I knew him when he was I didn't know him, but I was aware of him when he was the host of Monster Vision on TNT, the Saturday night monster and horror movie showcase, wherein Joe Bob was the host, sitting outside of his trailer in the dusty Texas wilderness, telling us about the weirdest and craziest horror movies that had ever been. Monster Vision was an enormously influential show on me, so much so that I went out and I tracked down Joe Bob's books, which were collections of his drive-in movie reviews from the 80s, particularly Joe Bob Goes to the Drive-In, and was maybe the single most influential work to me as far as shaping these sort of horror movies that I love and introducing me to bonkers pictures like The Evil Dead 2 and like Basket Case. Well, Joe Bob is back. He's on Shudder, which is an online network. And, you know, they say you can't go home again, but Joe Bob found a way. I think I might have talked about all of this once before, but I don't care. I'm so excited to have him back, and I was so excited to have him introducing movies again. And I was thrilled when he decided to introduce all of us to a movie that is out there and that I'm sure many of you have seen, especially you horror hounds, but which I had never gotten around to. And that, in a very long-winded way of finally getting to the movie I'm going to talk about, is Tourist Trap. This is sort of a prototypical bunch of teens out in the wilderness sort of movie, in its way, I guess, something of a Texas Chainsaw knockoff. They're out in the country and they stumble upon Chuck Connors, who is a crazy guy who's going to kill all of them. Or is he going to do it? Or is his creepy brother who wears a doll mask and like makes mannequins into things, is he going to kill him? Or are Chuck Connors and the brother the same person? It is hard to tell. This is a movie that is memorable and weird. It has inconsistent plotting that makes it difficult to know what's going on, but in this particular case adds to an overall dreamlike, or I suppose nightmarish quality to the whole thing, where it's always difficult to get a handle on what's going on, but in a way that's much more intriguing than with other movies like it, which is a testament to the quality with which the movie was made in sort of a weird way. Tourist Trap is a thing I had never seen before, but now that I've seen it, I am very glad that I did. And if you are a horror hound, I recommend going out and seeing it. 3.5 stars. And now it is time for MST3 A to Z. As if Joe Bob wasn't enough, I was also introduced to a lot of weird movies, although often in the more bad sense, by Mystery Science Theater 3000, as viewers of the show already are well aware. Because this is the segment of the show where we're watching all of the movies featured on Mystery Science Theater 3000 in alphabetical order, which brings us today to Colossus and the Headhunters, an Italian sword and sandals epic that's sort of a Hercules light. It's a bad movie. It is difficult at any moment to know what's going on, and not in an intriguing way like Tourist Trap, just in a what's going on and also I don't care kind of way. It is almost watchable. It looks okay, but it is not watchable. And here's the other thing. Now, to sort of pull back the curtain, oftentimes it is a few weeks after I see a movie before we get around to talking about it here on the show, for a lot of reasons. Show's only on once a week. I'm consuming movies like a crazy person. And Colossus and the Headhunters, as I have some notes that are here on the camera for me so I can talk to you a little bit about the movie, but the truth of the matter is, if I am being 100% honest to you guys, this is a movie I saw a couple of weeks ago, which is not that long. I can remember nothing about this movie. This movie is a void. I may as well have been hit over the head with a coconut. I do not remember anything about this movie. All I can tell you is that at the time I gave it the following rating that I guess I'll stand by. Colossus and the Headhunters, 1.5 star. And now it's time for a Hollywood classic. Folks, this review gives me no joy. You know, on Hollywood Classics, we are talking about, the old classic movies of Hollywood, and oftentimes I love those movies, and I feel sometimes like I've been giving them short shrift on the show. I love me a good black and white movie. There are a number of classic Hollywood stars that I adore. Jimmy Stewart, Myrna Loy, Katharine Hepburn is a great one, and one Katharine Hepburn movie I had never seen that I finally got around to was African Queen, the movie where she and Bogey travel down a river in Africa on this boat, the African Queen. It is a movie that, if I'm being honest with you, I have avoided watching for quite some time, and it turns out that I was correct to do so. Now, I understand that there are a lot of people that love this movie that is sort of part travelogue, part fighting World War I Germans on the river, but it is a very slow-moving movie that I found very uninvolving. If I'm being honest, watching this movie, I just didn't care. Hepburn and Bogey are Hepburn and Bogey in it, but I don't find them a very compelling screen pairing. I didn't find the adventure very compelling. The whole movie just didn't do it for me. If it did something for you, good on you, but for me, The African Queen is a miss. I'm giving it 2.5 stars. Oh, look out. It's an action explosion. This week on the Action Explosion, it's time for the Hurricane Heist. This is one of those movies that I forget what movie we went to see. We went to see some movie in the theater, probably a Marvel movie, if we're being completely honest. And in the trailers beforehand, they had a trailer for Hurricane Heist. And the wife and I, we looked at each other and we said, well, that can't possibly be a real movie. This movie looks like a prank of a movie. It is an almost tailor-made bad movie, except, you know, this is not a Sharknado. This is not a thing where they sat down and they said, let's make a real dumb movie. This is a movie where they sat down and they said, I bet this is a movie we can make. We'll make this movie about people trying to rob, like, the Federal Reserve or whatever, of bills that are to be destroyed in the midst of a hurricane. Now, if that sounds to you like that might actually be incredible, you're not alone. The truth, however, this is a very lame movie. It stars the girl from Taken, the one that got taken, and she's all right in it. But mostly it's just a really stupid and prolonged movie that is not terribly entertaining. The most entertaining thing about it is the hurricane, which is comical. As the movie begins with a straight-up Twister knockoff scene, like the beginning of Twister where the kids are trying to survive the Twister. Well, here the kids are trying to survive a hurricane, and I kid you not, the hurricane has a skull, a leering skull face inside of the hurricane that actually returns later. It is nuts. Now, there's also a heist element to this, and I love me a good heist movie. This is not that. This is a boring heist movie, which is why Hurricane Heist is only going to get 2 stars. Now it's time for the worst of the week. This week's worst of the week is a phenomenon, because if you're watching this show, surely you are saying to yourself, and if you're not watching this show, who am I talking to? Surely you are saying to yourself, Hurricane Heist isn't the worst movie of the week? What's the worst movie of the week? It's Yes, Giorgio. Now, I know what you're saying to yourself. You're saying, what is this? This isn't a movie. You're making this movie up. And I'm not going to help myself by describing it to you, because this sounds like a movie somebody made up. If you were playing one of those, party games where you have to pick the real movie, you would never pick this as the real movie. This is a movie that stars Luciano Pavarotti. Yes, he is the star. He plays essentially himself, a big-name opera singer. And here is the plot of this movie. And this is legit the plot. This is what the movie is all about. Pavarotti fakes a sore throat because he doesn't want to sing at a concert. They bring this doctor in, played by Catherine Harold. Catherine Harold decides to humor Pavarotti, helps him get over his sore throat so he can sing. He immediately falls in love with her and proposes to her that they have an affair. And not like in a secret, sneaky, like, let's have an affair kind of way. Like in a, let's have an affair, it's a no big deal kind of a thing. And the movie proceeds along these lines as if Pavarotti cheating on his wife is not only not a big deal, that no one should think it's a big deal, and that also ultimately builds to this point where he wants the doctor to enter into a throuple relationship, and when she puts up a fight for a while. For a while, she's like, Pavarotti, I'm only going to be your friend. I'm not going to be your side lady. But then, because this is, I guess, a romantic comedy, by the end she's like, hey, Pavarotti, let's do this. It is gross and stupid, and I did did not like it, and I am obviously very upset about it. Yes, Georgia, which is a creepy and disgusting title, given the proceedings. 1.5 star, and it only gets up to 1.5 stars because it is so mind-boggling. Now, folks, let's do the best of the bunch. This week's best of the bunch, Robin Williams, Come Inside My Mind, a documentary about the great Robin Williams. It is a superlative biography documentary, and what do I mean by that? I mean that, listen, this thing was on HBO. I was looking forward to watching it, but a lot of times you watch these biography documentaries, particularly of performers, and they are very by the numbers. They are very, here was his childhood, and here was his big break, and then there was this movie, and there was this movie, and there was this movie. And there's a lot of, like his friends and associates, his talking heads saying, well, the Robin I know, well, and this one time he really cut us up on set. And ultimately you end the movie feeling like you really understand the arc of Robin's career, but never really feeling like you have any sort of deeper understanding of the man himself. And listen, I get it, it's hard to do. I do a lot of classes here at the TV station where we talk about, maybe a particular filmmaker's career, and largely that's what we're talking about is the career. It is hard in a limited amount of time to give a sense of who a person was, particularly if you didn't know that person. And that's where this movie really, one-handed baseball, knocks it out of the park, is you leave this movie feeling like you maybe kind of know who Robin Williams was. And that is a miracle. Like, this is a movie where for 2 hours you sit there and you really get to know Robin Williams. And it does hit, the highs of his career and traces it, but in a much more personal and sympathetic way than most of these movies are. There's a ton of great behind-the-scenes stuff here. Especially when they're talking about Mork and Mindy, they show a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff there about just the sheer amount of improvisation Robin was doing. I would pay solid money to watch a cut-together version of an episode of Mork and Mindy with all of that stuff in it, because it's nuts and wonderful. So it does avoid giving that sort of movie-by-movie chronicle of a man and really traces a life in an intimate way that I wasn't previously certain was possible in this sort of documentary. I strongly recommend seeing this. Whether you're a big Robin Williams fan or you're not, and I don't know how you're not, you're at least a casual Robin Williams fan. So you should go and check out this documentary. Great, great stuff. 4.5 stars. That is going to do it for another episode of Every Movie Ever. We're making progress. One of these days I'm going to end this show and say, well, that's it. We watched every movie ever made. I guess that's the last show. But we are not there yet, so we'll keep going next week as we come back to try and keep reviewing every movie ever made. And don't forget to visit our website, northmetrotv.com/everymovieever. There, you can watch reviews of every movie we've ever covered here on the show, as well as complete episodes. That's northmetrotv.com/everymovieever.